Welcome back to another Battle Wagon adventure. Today, I paint my nails. What you may have noticed is the Battle Wagon plate on the top of the roof rack is not there right now. That is because I've got it off over here. I had it to make some brackets for another project I'll be doing that you'll see soon. So these are the two brackets I made for the left and right side of the vehicle. Basically what's going to happen is these are going to loop from one of the crossbars in the front, and they're going to go under. They line up with this angle here, and they are going to bolt into the bottom of this front wind plate. What I did to build these, I just had a vise, I had a couple old pieces of steel. These two actually formed a semicircle that was part of a pot hanging rack that got cut off. I just had these left over, they're already mostly painted. Because they're steel and I don't want them rusting, what I'll be doing is hitting them with this black spray paint that I just had sitting around to cover up the bulk of the area. And then inside the bolt holes, both for here and on the wind guard itself, I'm just going to be using some of my favorite nail polish. The purpose of that is obviously prevent rust, prevent corrosion, and it looks a little bit cleaner. These I just did the low spots. You're not really going to see these because of where they sit on the underside of the roof basket, so it's not critical that they're all one color. The reason I have the nail polish is on this. I don't want to respray it because it's going to be the first thing you see on the car, and you're going to see that different shade of black going across. So it's for that reason that I just have the nail polish. I'm just going to touch up these areas that need to be touched. But on these, it doesn't matter. They're not visible, so close enough is going to be fine. If you've never used the nail polish trick to cover small areas before, it works really well. Put it on a little bit heavy. It also works for if you find a nail polish that's really close to the color of your car paint, you can do that as well. One side looks fine on these. We're going to flip them, hit the other side, and then they should be good to install once they're dry. Now my favorite nail polish is dried and the paint on the brackets is dried as well, so I'm ready to reinstall it. If you're ever doing a project where you paint around the bolt holes, just know that with the paint buildup, it can get a little more tight to get the bolts through, so I recommend test fitting all the bolts before you put it back on, and then you can also leave them in there so when you hook it up onto the car, the bolts hold it in, you just have to throw the nuts on the back. Similarly, make sure you test any bracket holes you drill as well. You're going to have the same issue there. It won't push through easily in all cases, but what will happen is you can thread them and they'll go through just fine. Here's one bolt that I just threaded through to make sure we had the clearance, and as you can see, it pulled off a little bit of the nail polish that I put in there. So don't worry about that. It's still better coverage than the bare exposed metal that was there before, and my guess is once you torque these down, you're going to take off a good chunk of it anyhow. It's just anything that's exposed directly to the surface you want to get mostly covered. That way it's less of a chance of corrosion, especially up here with all the salt in the New England winters. Now that all the bolt holes both on the top and the bracket holes in the bottom have been test fit and everything is dried enough, I'm going to put it back on the car and then try to get our brackets installed. It is officially the next day. I spent last night going to the hardware store picking up the appropriate size nuts and washers so that I could actually put the brackets on today. So I have the hardware that's going to go through these bolts and then into the windscreen plate on the roof basket, and then I'll be shimming off the back just by wrapping it around the crossbars, and then I'll be shimming it out with some of the rubber pieces here to prevent it from one, rattling, and two, sliding off on its own. The rubber pieces are fairly thick, all things considered, and they're not going to slide out once they're in there. They're a pretty tight fit. As you probably saw there, I had to take the bracket out and try to rebend this part here that loops around a few times, try to get it just right so that the shims were neither too tight nor too loose. This is what my bracket looks like. Is it hooks over here on this side, comes over, I got the holes up front, and then I got the two on the nose by the wind plate. If you're doing this, you're gonna chip it again a little bit when you're doing that, and then when I was sliding this on, I heard a piece of paint fly off of the crossbar. Not a huge deal for those. The crossbar and the rest of the rack for that matter is aluminum, so it really shouldn't be an issue unless it gets bombed with salt in the winter, which is a possibility, but probably not most likely thing to happen to this. Now I got the other bracket for the other side. I'm gonna resume with installing that, and then we'll mount up our next Battle Wagon project. By some Christmas miracle, the bracket was actually about the right opening through the crossbar loop here, so I didn't actually have to resize it. It worked very well on the first try. I did have to, on both sides, as you probably saw, pop out these bolts because it wasn't lining up perfectly because of the angle it was coming in at. It was clashing on the back of this. My first thought was I'll just leave them in and then it'll pop right on, but because of the angles and because of the variation in the shims, I didn't get that. Because of that, it was easier to pop them out, line everything up, and then put them in afterwards, which is not what my first thought was. And also, if you're making a bracket of your own, make sure if you're using any shimming, like the rubber that I'm using, you put it on the same side of the bar on both sides. So I put it on the top so that way they're both raised by the same amount. You do it on the bottom, doesn't really matter that much. The reason I chose the top is because if the weight is bearing down on it and it's not shimmed on the top with the rubber, you're gonna get a lot of that rubbing, rip through the paint, and then potentially cause rattling down the road, which is not what I want to listen to. There you go. I do have the brackets both installed now, and the Battle Wagon project is complete. Stay tuned. I will show what they are for very shortly.